What's the ceiling for Notre Dame's defense under Chris Ash? And will there be more commitments in the class of 2026? Plus, who would be the best former Irish player to hang with at a tailgate? We're covering it all on today's Mailbag edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. And today is Friday, July 11th. So happy Friday to you and thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. Before we get rolling, I'd really appreciate it if you took a quick second to subscribe on YouTube or follow on your preferred podcast platform if you have not already. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, we have got a full mailbag of burning questions from the best fans in college football, and we're starting with a question that I have received a lot this offseason. What can Notre Dame expect from Chris Ash now that he's running the defense? Plus, we're going to take a look at the future of the 2026 recruiting class. Also, what the quarterback should be doing this month, and cap it all off with some lighter, fan-driven questions, including a very important debate. Who is the ultimate Notre Dame tailgate guest? But we begin with a question from Dan Benson. Shout out to my guy. What can we expect from the new defensive coordinator, Chris Ash? Lots of returning talent, but a new scheme. Do you think he will keep things simple and let the players play? Will he run a more pro-style defense given his most recent jobs? And will he lean on Marcus Freeman for influence? So a lot to get to there. But honestly, I expect the defense to look very similar to what we are accustomed to, or what we have been accustomed to, I should say, under Al Golden during the first few games. Like, it would be quite a shock, right, if Notre Dame drastically changed what they were doing on defense, if they came out in a 3-3-5 against Miami or a 3-4 or anything like that. They're obviously going to mix up the sets. They're going to mix up the personnel. But I think for most casual viewers, it's going to look very similar to what Notre Dame was running under Al Golden. They're going to continue to run a pro-style base 4-3 defense that will be very aggressive in terms of how much they blitz, and they're also going to incorporate a heavy dose of nickel mixed in with that. I don't think it's going to be quite as complex this season as it was last year under Al Golden, but that's due to a variety of different factors. I think it mostly has to do with the fact that Notre Dame is not going to have Xavier Watts, Jack Kaiser, Howard Cross, or Riley Mills out there on the field, who are basically acting as coaches on the grass or turf. This defense has experience. They have a ton of playmakers, but they don't have that level of experience with a guy like Xavier Watts, who had played a million snaps, same with Jack Kaiser and Howard Cross and Riley Mills. So they were already probably going to have to simplify the defense a little bit, even if it was still Al Golden. He was entering his fourth year as the defensive coordinator, because in order to be able to run something so complex, you have to have players out there who understand it all and can adjust on the fly. Not saying that the current Notre Dame defense can't do that. I just don't think it would make sense to ask them to do as much as they were able to ask Xavier Watts and Jack Kaiser. So they're going to have to simplify it a little bit because of that. And also, it's a new defensive coordinator. There's probably going to be some new terminology and all things like that. But the players just aren't experienced as they were last season. I think the most likely change, the most obvious thing that we're going to notice early on, is they're going to run more zone coverage under Chris Ash than they did under Al Golden. That's been a big talking point during spring practice. They also talked about splitting the defensive ends out a little bit wider, but that's more of a minor change. But I also think that there is some confusion about how much Notre Dame ran man under Al Golden. It wasn't like 90% of the time. It was just over 50%. I think it was like 55%. So they still did run a lot of zone concepts. I think they're just going to run a little bit more under Chris Ash, but still, they're also going to run a lot of man because they have two really talented cornerbacks in Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, and then you also have Devontae Smith at nickel. Over time, I think you're going to start to notice more changes in terms of how they line up, different personnel packages, and maybe the defense will look a little bit different. But to change it all out of the gate would be quite a shock and probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And ever since Chris Ash took over the job, he has said all the right things. You know, he's praised Al Golden a ton. He says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is true. But he's going to have to install his own stuff as well. And considering all of the Notre Dame players were recruited to run Al Golden's defense, I think it's going to be a nice, healthy blend of what Chris Ash sees in a defense. Like you mentioned, Dan, he's been in the pros. Al Golden ran a pro-style defense, so there's going to be similarities, but Chris Ash is going to have to sprinkle his own flavor, his own seasoning on that, and look a little bit how he wants it compared to Al Golden. But overall, I think the biggest thing when we talk about Chris Ash is the pressure on him is going to be immense. And the moment his unit makes a mistake, fans are going to blame him, fair or not. But no matter what, I think Notre Dame's defense will take a slight step back, but they're still going to be a top 10 defense in the country because they just have so many talented players on that side of the ball. All right, next question. Chad Reeves, 403. Will Notre Dame have a 1,000-yard receiver in 2025? If so, who? No, I don't think they're going to have a 1,000-yard wide receiver, but that's because they have two guys who could be wide receiver one, which means they're going to have to share the wealth. The last Notre Dame wide receiver to have over 1,000 yards in a single season was Chase Claypool back in 2019. The next closest was Kevin Austin in 2021, who had 888 receiving yards, including the bowl game. So I think that's a more realistic outcome for Notre Dame's leading wide receiver because Kevin Austin in 2021 was the leading receiver, but Michael Mayer was right behind him, even though he's a tight end, with just over 800 receiving yards. This year, Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse are going to be competing to be the team's leading wide receiver, and that's a good thing for Notre Dame because they haven't really had two options that are that talented in a long time, not to mention the fact that I think Jordan Faison, Will Pauling, and Eli Raridan are going to be very involved in the pass game as well. So if you look back to that season in 2019, Claypool was far and away the best pass-catching option on the team. Cole Kmet was second on the team in receiving yards with 515, which is more than 500 yards less than what Chase Claypool had. So clearly, the entire passing game was built around getting Chase Claypool the ball, partially because he was the only real option out there. The next best wide receiver was Chris Fink on that team, who is more of a possession guy. Obviously, we love Chris Fink on this show. We love slot wide receivers. So I think in that system, it was all geared towards Chase Claypool, but this offense has a bunch of different options. It wouldn't really make sense to just put everything on Malachi Fields or put everything on Jaden Greathouse when you can mix it up, share the wealth, and keep the defense on their toes. I think it's going to look a lot more like 2018. Miles Boykin was wide receiver one that year. He finished with 872 yards. Claypool was wide receiver two, and he was right behind Boykin in production with 639 yards as a junior. And Chris Fink, very productive slot receiver, had 571 yards. So I think the output this season is going to resemble 2018 because Notre Dame had an effective passing game, and Notre Dame had several good options. All right, next question. From @DadDomerNM, what should CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey be doing in July to get ready for the season? Do you have any info that they are doing those things? I mean, asking me what they should be doing almost makes me sound like a parent, right? Like, CJ, Kenny, you guys should be doing this all day. But I understand the sentiment here. I think it's probably best for them to be working out a lot, eating right, and getting as many reps as possible with the wide receivers. Not just Fields, not just Greathouse, all of them. Pauling, Faison, Micah Gilbert, who's back healthy, Elijah Burris. Like, they need to be working with the wide receivers as much as humanly possible to develop that timing, to develop that chemistry, because that is so crucial at the college level, especially now with so many different timing routes, option routes, and things like that. Like, it's very rare for receivers to just go out there and run the traditional route tree, which was like hitch, slant, out, dig, comeback. Like, there's so many different options for wide receivers now in a given play based on what the defenses show them. And in order to develop that chemistry and understand the timing with the quarterback and the wide receiver, they just have to continue to stack as many reps as humanly possible. Then you think back to spring practice, right? The top four wide receivers were all out or limited during spring ball. Malachi Fields wasn't there. Jaden Greathouse was limited because he was resting from the season. Jordan Faison was playing lacrosse. Will Pauling was coming off an injury. So that's a lot of reps that these guys have to make up. Notre Dame has team lifts all the time, just like any other college football program around the country, but they also have player-led workouts, and they need to, first of all, maximize those player-led workouts and then continue to work beyond that. Stay after practice, set up their own throwing sessions. It's really on the players to maximize this time in the summer, and to my knowledge, they've been handling the summer the right way. This is a pretty quiet time on campus. Notre Dame is not a place notorious for having a bunch of summer school students. It's a lot of athletes there. There's really not much going on. I can say this with some experience because I was just on campus a few weeks ago for a wedding, and it was the big recruiting weekend, but other than that, campus was dead. So it's really just the athletes. It's a time to knock out your summer classes and put in a lot of work in the weight room and on the field. So I think these guys are training a lot, but beyond just getting reps, this is where one of them has to step up as a leader. They need to be the one organizing these sessions. They have to be the ones leading the sessions when they're out there. They have to make sure that everyone is held accountable, even though the coaching staff isn't around. They can't just be following along. Like, they can't have like Fields or Greathouse be the one kind of leading the charge on all these workouts. It's got to be the quarterbacks, because I think that shows real leadership from either one of these guys. And it is my understanding that they're doing that, and that kind of stuff goes a long way. So clearly, 2025 could be a very special season. We're all really excited about the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the defense, but could it get even better in the years ahead? Coming up next, we're going to turn our attention to the future and break down where Notre Dame's class of 2026 might go from here. Stick around. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to just managing your money, you're also building wealth. It's so much easier to stay on top of your finances when your accounts and your spending are all in one place, and that's exactly what you get with Monarch Money. Not only does it help you plan your long-term goals, but I have found it very helpful in managing my day-to-day responsibilities. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, these next two questions are pretty similar, so I lumped them together. This first one comes from Bob Murphy 11, who says, once Nick Reddish and Elijah Golden commit, will Notre Dame take any other prospects in the class of 2026? And at Black Cypress Solutions asks, is Notre Dame going to take any more linebackers in the class of 2026? Okay, so Nick Reddish is set to commit later today. I do expect him to commit to the Irish and become the fifth defensive back in the class. That should wrap up the defensive back group, and this is arguably one of the best defensive back classes for Notre Dame in a really, really long time, probably dating back to the Holtz era, because you've got the headliners, you've got Kari Adams, Joey O'Brien. I would even include Aiden Pouncey in that mix as well, and I think that Chasten Smith and Nick Reddish are very underrated players with really high ceilings. So Nick Reddish wraps up that group. I don't think they're going to take any more than 5. I was kind of surprised they took 5 in this class, given how good last year's class was with Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, and Jadon Blair. But that should wrap up that position, and then Elijah Golden is going to commit a couple weeks from now on July 26th, and if and when he chooses the Irish, that will make it 4 defensive linemen. I think they were more than happy to take 4, maybe 5 if it was the right fit, but they were definitely targeting 4 defensive linemen. And now with Rodney Dunham, Ebenezer Iwatade, Tiki Hola, and potentially Elijah Golden, that would round out that group. So all in all, assuming Reddish and Elijah Golden commit, they would have 27 commits in the class of 2026. They have not had that many players in one class since 2021. So I would think that they're done, right? Because they're definitely done at quarterback, although I think they should look at Diabell, considering he's a 5-star and it was interested in Notre Dame before Notre Dame moved off him. And then you have running back, where they have Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton, so they're set there. Receivers, they've got 5 of them. They're good there. At tight end, they got Ian Premer and also Preston Frizzell. So they're probably set there. Maybe they're willing to take a third. And Evan Jacobson, he was a top Notre Dame target for a long time, but he may have missed his chance. On the offensive line, they've got 6 commitments, so that's more than enough there. Defensive line 4. But linebacker, going back to at Black Cypress Solutions questions, they only have 2 guys there. So maybe they'd be willing to take one more, but they have a lot of young linebackers in that room already, a lot of very talented guys, and considering that Notre Dame mostly runs nickel, which involves 2 linebackers on the field at the same time, there isn't like a desperate need to add a third linebacker, but I think that they would be open to it if it was the right situation. Defensive back, they're done. So yeah, I think they're probably done once Reddish and Golden commit, but whenever you're dealing with these recruiting classes and you've got all your work wrapped up by the start of the season, which is great for Notre Dame because that means all they can do now is work on retaining all these guys, just recruiting the guys that they have and making sure that they stay rock solid until the early signing period. That makes their life easier, and they can also focus on the class of 2027. But every year, there's always like a few guys who rise up the ranks during their senior year, because that's also important to point out. These guys have only played their junior season, and there's a lot of players who really just pop off during their senior year and really just get on everyone's radar. So if there's an interior defensive lineman who really pops for Notre Dame, or if there is a linebacker that just kind of comes out of nowhere and Notre Dame is really interested in him, maybe they'd be willing to take him, but it would have to be at one of those two positions because every other one I just mentioned, they are done. Like if Alistair Vallejo, even though he's not a late riser in terms of like a senior breakout player, he started rising this past offseason, Notre Dame was looking at him, he ultimately committed to Michigan. If Vallejo were to reconsider his decision and decide, hey, he actually wants to go to Notre Dame would be willing to take him because they need interior defensive linemen. But that's really it. And I would say after that, they're already set. Once these guys commit, they're going to feel pretty good, and everything extra would be that. It'd be extra, right? It'd be like ice cream after a long day. All right, next one. I love this username, by the way, at BeLessWrong422. Can you explain how Notre Dame helps the recruits academically when they start school? I would think it would be intimidating to choose Notre Dame for a high school player, given the reputation Notre Dame has and the seemingly vigorous athletic demands. Okay, so this is a really good question. I have my own understanding, but then I did some research. I talked with a great friend of the program, Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated, who's been on the show a million times. He also used to work for Notre Dame's recruiting department, so he was a great resource on the topic. So came together, talked this question through. Here's the answer. So when players are recruits and they visit campus, the player and their families always meet with several support staff members. This could be an admissions counselor, the dean of the department that they would like to ultimately join, any academic support staff that helps the team. Like they get acclimated with them while they're recruits before they even get to campus. And then some of them also meet with student tutors to get an idea of what their tutoring sessions would like, what's available to them. They also typically, maybe not on the first visit, but at some point, they're going to meet with professors for their given major. And according to Eric, 80% of recruits meet with Chris Stevens, who was the inventor of the Keurig. You might have heard of it before. And fun fact, was also my neighbor during my junior year when I was living in Irish Crossings. We'd always see him walking his dog. He'd see us out there grilling on our back deck that was a little bit elevated. We ended up talking to him. Really great guy. He teaches classes for Mendoza, or at least he did at the time. I don't know if he's still teaching classes at the school, but he is a very great resource, lives in South Bend year-round, loves the university, loves the football program. I believe he played basketball for Notre Dame too. So they meet with him, great ambassador for the school. He tells them a lot about Mendoza. If a lot of these guys end up going into the business school, things like that. When they meet with all these different people, they run through academic expectations once they get to Notre Dame. They also talk about strategies to manage their workload, and they lay out the total hours that will be spent with academic support during their freshman year and then beyond that, because there is a minimum number of hours required to spend with academic support your first semester at college, which then can be dropped if you clear a certain GPA. But if you don't clear that GPA, then you are then assigned more hours with the academic support staff, because at that point, you're at risk. So there is not only an academic support building on campus for all these students, including the athletes, but the football staff also organizes all these opportunities for the different players, and also for these tutors or peer tutors to come to the Goog meeting rooms, work with the players, and work from the facility. So it's all offered to them. And then I think once they have the Shields Hall built up and ready to go, they're going to have even more space within the facility to work with academic support staff. So you're right. This is a very good question, and it can be very daunting for these players because Notre Dame obviously takes their academics seriously, but the football program provides them with a ton of resources, and they lay it out all at the beginning, right? When they're recruits, they lay it out. They say, this is what the expectation is. This is how we can help you meet that goal. And whether it be peer tutors, support staff, there are a numerous amount of ways for these players to get the help they need to not only just pass, but also thrive in these academic situations. And I think that Notre Dame has made this a huge priority, especially as of late. Like, you haven't heard as many players who are academically ineligible. So I think that is a big testament to the staff and also all the members of the sports staff that help these guys, because you're right, it is a daunting task, but these guys have figured out a way to help the players. All right. at YoTeachIRL. What will happen first? Notre Dame wins a national championship or Mike Mickens takes a coaching job elsewhere? Oof. I don't want to bum anyone out, but the odds of a top assistant leaving for a defensive coordinator job are higher than winning a national championship. But you could say that about literally any program. This is not specific to Notre Dame. If you just think about it, like winning a championship is really, really, really hard. That's why Notre Dame has not won one since 1988. Meanwhile, college football assistant coaches, especially the ones who are really good, move around all the time. And Mickens has been very open about the fact that he wants to be a defensive coordinator. He said that in the lead up to the college football playoff when it kind of became clear to everyone that the job might be open because Al Golden was probably going to end up with the Bengals. Mike Mickens was asked directly, do you want to be the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame? And he said, Marcus Freeman knows that I'm ready for the job. He wanted it. He didn't get it. Marcus Freeman picked Chris Ash over him. And Mickens started to look around this offseason. This isn't the first time that he's had a bunch of suitors, but he was in the mix for a job at Texas. He was in the mix for a job in the NFL, I believe. They were reaching out to him. I don't know if he actually interviewed for them, but he has had plenty of suitors and ultimately decided to stay at Notre Dame. He's very well compensated, but if Notre Dame's defense has another great season, Mickens is going to be a big reason why, because Notre Dame's defensive backs are so good. They've also been recruiting extremely well, and he's going to get offered more jobs in the offseason. So that just happened. So I think that there is a chance he could leave after this year. I thought there was a chance he could have left after this past season, but he's still at Notre Dame, so I'm not saying he's definitely going to leave, but I would say it's more likely that he leaves than Notre Dame wins a national championship this year, even though I think the team is going to be really good and there's a bunch of talent, but they also have a first-year starting quarterback and they haven't won a national championship since 1988. Not ruling it out entirely, but if you're just looking at the odds, I would have to say it's probably more likely that Mickens finds a job elsewhere before Notre Dame wins a national championship. But now that we have covered the serious stuff, now it's time to kick back, literally, because we're talking kickers, we're talking karaoke, and who you would most want to hang out with outside Notre Dame Stadium on a game day right after this. All right, we got a few more questions left. I always like wrapping up the mailbag with a few fun questions, but this one is actually kind of serious as it relates to this year. Joseph Catalano, I think I said that right, 5493. How do the kickers look this year? Very fair question. We have not heard much about him, but I would say that the kicking situation appears to be in a little bit better place now that Noah Burnett is healthy, the transfer from North Carolina. He was recovering from a previous injury. Looked a little bit erratic in spring practice, shanked one during the Blue Gold game, but ultimately hit another one. And I'm going to cut him some slack because first game out there, he wasn't completely healthy at the time. But keep an eye out for true freshman Eric Schmidt. He was the top-ranked kicker and punter in the country last year. And yeah, it's obviously a risk to put a freshman out there on the field in a big-time spot for the first game. But if he's better in the summer and he's better in fall camp, Eric Schmidt is going to play. It's great for Notre Dame to have a senior option in Noah Burnett, who's been kicking for North Carolina for the past 3 years. He had a really good year 2 years ago when he was over 90%, but on average, he's about a 70% field goal kicker. He's used to playing in big stadiums, but I think the competition between Eric Schmidt and Noah Burnett is going to be good for both players because last year, Mitch Jeter had no real competition when he came over from South Carolina. He was Money Mitch. He was kicking field goals at like an insane clip when he was with the Gamecocks. And then it wasn't as perfect when he was at Notre Dame because he got hurt, but he came through for the Irish in a big way in that game against Texas A&M, and they needed him. That was a difficult environment to kick in, right? On the road at Kyle Field. Really, really loud, but Mitch Jeter came through for the Irish then, and I think you bring in a guy like Noah Burnett, who's at least been in those kinds of stadiums before, even if North Carolina isn't playing in the SEC, but you have that option. But then if you just have a true freshman who's not scared of the moment, and he's just more talented and more consistent, then you can bring him in. It makes sure that Noah Burnett continues to take his job seriously, continues to work and get better, and then Eric Schmidt could just kind of take the world by storm if he ends up winning the job in the summer. I don't expect that to happen. I do expect Noah Burnett to be the kicker, and I think he's going to be a solid option for the Irish, but I would not be shocked if the freshman took over at some point. All right, next question. This one is from Eric Loeb. Which former Notre Dame player would be the best hang at a tailgate? Okay, this is a really good question. I thought about this a lot. I think Brady Quinn or Golden Tate would be a lot of fun because they would have endless stories, and I know both of those guys like to have a good time. The only problem is, Like if Brady Quinn and or Golden Tate were at your tailgate, you would just get swarmed all the time. Like fans would be constantly coming up. They'd be taking pictures. They'd ask for autographs. And like, it really wouldn't be all that fun because you wouldn't really get a chance to just hang out with them, talk to them, and enjoy the game. There'd just be too many people around. So unless you were like kind of off in a secluded area or something like that, that actually probably wouldn't work all that well. I also thought about Mike McGlinchey because I've seen that guy put down a pitcher in like ridiculously fast time. So I'm sure he'd be a good hang at a tailgate like this, but he's also 6'8", an NFL player, very recognizable. So I'm sure a lot of fans would come up to him as well. So the real answer to this is Mike Bray. And I got to give a shout out to the guys at Irish Illustrated. They were asked a similar question about like who would you invite to a 4th of July cookout. A little bit different, 4th of July cookout and a Notre Dame tailgate, but they had it right. And the answer to this is Mike Bray. Even though he's not a former football player, that would just be the best time ever to get to hang out with Mike Bray, put down some cold beers, just reminisce on all the different things that he experienced during his time at Notre Dame. He loves the place. He loves the university. He could get along with everyone. And I would do anything to be able to hang out with Mike Bray for an hour, let alone multiple hours at a Notre Dame tailgate. So that is the definitive answer. But I've really been thinking about this a lot, and I was just like, imagine building up a dream tailgate. I think Kyle Rudolph would actually be a lot of fun as well. And dark horse candidate here that I don't think people are going to agree with, but what if Charlie Weiss was around? Wouldn't that be fun? Or maybe it wouldn't be fun at all, but it would be interesting, right? So that was just something I was thinking about, but good question, Eric Loeb. All right, last one, Douglas Q. Should Living on a Prayer be the fourth quarter song for every game? This is an interesting question. Notre Dame obviously plays a lot of Bon Jovi during their home games. John Bon Jovi is a huge Notre Dame fan. His son walked on at the football team a couple years ago, but I would say no, okay? Because if you have the same song play at the same time of every game, it could get stale unless it's a good song, unless it's a really good song and it kind of makes sense for the moment. And Notre Dame already has a signature song, right? They play I'm Shipping Up to Boston by the Dropkick Murphys, but they do it before kickoff, right? It's a staple, always gets the people going. You hear the Here Come the Irish and then the Dropkick Murphy beat drop. It's awesome, right? And it's right before kickoff. Everyone is amped up and ready to go, and everything feels so alive in that moment. That's perfect, and they should not change it. So do you need another staple for every home game? Because there's a lot of like big time college football programs. They all have their own signature song. Like Florida plays I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty during the fourth quarter of their games. And then everyone puts their phone out. They light up the stadium. I've been to a game at the Swamp. That part was really cool. The part that's not cool about the Swamp is it was 1,000,000 degrees on the field and the humidity was so disgusting. I had like a gray shirt on during the day. I had to go to the Florida bookstore to buy a dark dry fit shirt because it was that bad. So when Notre Dame plays at Florida here a couple years from now, I would just warn anyone who's going there, bring multiple shorts for game day. But anyway, back to the point. Tennessee, they actually started playing the song The Way I Talk by Morgan Wallen during the fourth quarter of their games recently. They made a change from Friends in Low Places by Garth Brooks. That was a pretty controversial decision, even though I love the song The Way I Talk by Morgan Wallen, and he's a big Tennessee fan. So these teams, these programs, they have their signature song, and I feel like Notre Dame already has theirs. And if you have two, it could become a little bit stale. But that's just my own opinion. I love I'm Shipping Up to Boston before kickoff. Eventually, they're probably going to change it. But for now, I think it's perfect. And I don't think that Notre Dame needs another song that they play every single game. I think it makes sense to play Living on a Prayer, but I think they should probably rotate the songs in the fourth quarter. But that's just me. If you disagree, let me know what song you would love to hear Notre Dame play in the fourth quarter or at any point in the game and become a new staple, because I'm interested, right? Anything to improve the experience at Notre Dame Stadium. But one big improvement that they're making this year, they're selling alcohol in the stadiums. That is going to make it a little bit more lively. But that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks so much for making Locked On Irish your first listen or watch of the day. And thank you for tuning in all week long. If you have not already, make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app and leave a like, rating, a review to help more Notre Dame fans find the show. I'm going to be back on Tuesday of next week to react to Nick Reddish's commitment and talk more Notre Dame football as we get closer to the start of fall camp. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll see you then.